Blade Nzimande when he took office earlier this year. He joins me now in the studio to discuss what his recovery plan will be to ensure that the state of our transport is viable and cost effective. If you want to tweet us or send your comments to the show, the hashtag on Twitter is FullView. Of course, we do encourage you to send us your voice notes on 066 479 8056. Minister, welcome to the show. I mean, I suppose from higher education to transport, isn't it rather like from the pan to the fire?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mohani. Thanks for inviting me. And let me also greet your viewers and listeners. Yes, of course, you know, I mean, it's been quite a challenge. I thought higher education was tough, but transport is much more complicated, I must admit. Precisely also because of the central role it's playing as the heartbeat of our economy, as we actually saying that. And it also, I'm coming into a portfolio that is very uneven. There's been a lot of progress that has been made on the one hand, but also on the other hand, there's been lots of regression and weaknesses and problems that needs to be addressed. First of all, let me talk about progress. I think we've got a very good framework, policy framework, which is anchored around building an integrated public transport system. By that we mean that we've got a policy framework that says we need a rail-based public transport system, which then the rest of the other modes link to it, the road or ground modes that I'm talking about. For instance, you know, your minibus taxis should ideally be linking to your rail system. Yes, and train stations. The buses also should be doing that, you know, be moving, taking people to and fro train stations and so on. We do have that framework, but it's unevenly funded. That's one very progressive thing. We've also invested, albeit unevenly, for instance, tax recapitalization, to try and make sure that we don't have old Skoro taxis, minibus taxis that are on the road. Obviously, that's not enough. That's why we are still looking into other ways of subsidizing the minibus taxi industry. You know, rail has been one of our biggest setbacks because Metro Rail has actually seen a lot of regression in PRASA. I'm willing to accept that. PRASA seems to be, over the last decade or so, been concerned about everything else other than providing safe passenger rail transport.
Minister, you've outlined, I suppose, the broader picture, and I think for the usefulness of this discussion, let's break it down chunk by chunk. Let's start with PRASA because that's where you are. You've spoken recently of a recovery plan. What will that entail, briefly?
Well, it's a turnaround strategy that I've asked the new PRASA board, you know, to actually come up with. First of all, there are certain basic things that have got to be done. Just about every executive manager at PRASA at the moment is acting. I would like this board to actually appoint permanent people. Permanent in the modern sense, some of them are 5-year contracts, you know, others are longer, but so that people can be able to take responsibility and feel that
they're empowered to do so.
They're empowered to do so. The second thing I've asked the board is to regularize finances. PRASA has been having huge irregular contracts with people, you know, that were just done, and shortcuts. And also PRASA has been like an ATM in that sense, you know, that people have just been milking money.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you've talked about accountability and transparency. Yes. Where are we in terms of investigations of alleged corruption by specific individuals within PRASA?
Lots of investigations have been done into PRASA. For example, there's been an investigation that was done by a firm of lawyers called Werkmans. Those reports are there. I've said to the board, go into those reports and take action. And they've told me that very soon they will actually be taking action. The Hawks now are cooperating because not so long ago there was a feeling that the Hawks are actually not cooperating. They also want to actually take up these cases. Internally, we need disciplinary procedures, you know, against people that have done very wrong things. For instance, we've just discovered that there was an attempt, for instance, to take some money out of PRASA into the VBS, the Vendor Building Society, you know, money that would have sunk. We are following up leads on that and to say we need to take action because that's a crucial component of your turnaround strategy.
But what's also been interesting to observe is just how brazen it seems the wrongdoing was. That, recently we had the chair of the board being bundled into a vehicle and being kidnapped. I mean, just how bad are things there, and how much is there a fight back to try and scupper these efforts you've just outlined?
Definitely there is fight back. You know, part of the kidnapping of the chairperson, Ms. Khanyi Kweyama, had a lot to do with actually intimidating her, you know, and intimidating others who are actually wanting to change things for the better, because that's commuting for the working class in the main that we actually need. We support them as government as much as possible, and also to try our best to provide security so that they are actually able to focus on what needs to be done.
So that's what's happening in the boardroom, but let's talk about what the public experiences of the passenger rail agency. I mean, we've seen the torching of coaches in the Western Cape. That's something that's been going on for some time, and it doesn't seem that there's a strong plan to deal with it, to prevent it from continuing. Every other day a coach is burnt. Are they just sitting ducks?
The positive side first, if I may start with that. We will soon be producing our first train that will be produced locally in South Africa, and we're planning.
Those might get burned.
Absolutely, but I must start there, because it means that we do have a plan to act. Because part of the problem in a place like the Western Cape and many places where we've got metro rail that is under PRASA, we don't have full trains. You have a train with 5 coaches, which is supposed to be a train with 10 coaches, for instance. So we do need to produce. But yes, you are right, Bongani. We are not going to actually achieve that even if we produce more coaches, unless we are able to find the perpetrators of the burning of trains. We are working with police now very closely. In the Western Cape, we are also working with the MEC as well as the city of Cape Town itself, as well as the police, to come together and say, let's identify who the culprits are.
But, I mean, obviously I appreciate that you're new in the portfolio, and I'm not making this your fault necessarily, but at the same time, this has been an ongoing problem for some time. I mean, the idea that we're still trying to investigate, we're still trying to see who the culprits are, suggests to me that we haven't been on top of it. So you can produce all the new flashy coaches you want to, they'll get burnt.
Yes, you are right. That is why it's one of the priority areas I've identified.
What's the plan to deal with this decisively, Minister?
The plan, firstly, it's the criminal justice system that we must identify. The second thing is actually to engage communities, because communities, in one way or the other, they know who are the people who are doing this. They themselves, communities, get their own frustration, but we are saying, let's work together. That is why, amongst other things, I have an Imbizo, for instance, in the middle of September in Cape Town, to actually say, let's come and discuss and identify what needs to be done. We have a plan that we are developing.
Why not beef up security? Why not have boots on the ground, make sure that every coach is protected, deal with this thing decisively instead of an Imbizo that's going to tell you what?
Well, an Imbizo is important, but I don't think we must underestimate that, because through an Imbizo we can collect a lot of intelligence to begin with. Secondly is awareness and mobilization of communities to say these are assets that are actually working with. Of course, we are working with Minister Cele, with the police, you know, to get into depth and also to begin to say, how do we provide additional security? Should that security, for instance, that's one thing that we are looking at, you know, be the reinstating of what is already being rebuilt, your railway police, for instance, that should focus on that. Private security, where should private security be playing a role, if at all? Because one of the problems we have at PRASA that I'm willing to admit, we're spending hundreds of millions of rands in security, but we are not getting value for money.
But also the service is erratic. I mean, there is a real frustration. It never justifies the burning of coaches, for sure, but there's a real frustration for many of those commuters because the service is erratic. People have been fired from jobs because they can't guarantee if or when they might get to work on a particular day.
That's why it's important to stabilize governance. That's why I've prioritized that. You stabilize the board, you stabilize senior management, you stabilize regional managers, then you actually are beginning to set in place a process of actually having these trains being better managed, apart from these other interventions that one is actually talking about.
So, trouble at Transnet, the taxi wars seem to continue, and where are we on e-tolls? Those are yet more of the questions that I'm going to pose to the Minister. You are watching On the Record. This is our weekly feature here on The Full View. Send us your comments, hashtag The Full View on Twitter. Send us your voice notes. I do want your responses. Are you convinced by the Minister's answers? Will an Imbizo do it? Is that all it'll take? More from the Minister after the break.
Minister, they don't care first about the backyarders. And then we are sick and tired. And we are fighting, multi-family issues. That's why we want to go and build our shacks so that we can live with our children.
Our province is on the move all the time. The more houses are delivered, the more people move into our province.
Isibuhlungu ngaphakathi ngiko sesenza intuthu njengaphakathi kwasempumelelo. Izindlu zethu enelempa angeke iziphele singakazitholi izindlu.
My opinion, Mr. Infantino and FIFA, everybody agreed that VAR is not going well. It's not going well, that's the reality. There's a lot of complaints. We just need to know who is refereeing the game, who take decisions in the game. We have the right to know, the people have the right to know.
On the Record, this is our Thursday weekly feature where we, of course, as you know, debate the hot button issues of the day. We've had discussions, we've had debates, and we've had one-on-one conversations. Tonight, my guest is the Minister of Transport, Dr. Blade Nzimande, in the studio answering your questions. Minister, let's continue our conversation. Let's go to the taxis now, the taxi industry. We've seen, for example, that the taxi wars are continuing. There are sporadic flashpoints, and there is now loss of life that we're beginning to see again. What's happening there?
It's very unfortunate on that scope because the taxi industry is one of South Africa's biggest achievements by black entrepreneurs. They carry 68% of our passengers now, for our commuters on a daily basis.
It's the one success from apartheid South Africa.
Absolutely.
Black-dominated industry. Why aren't we looking after it?
In fact, there are two. The other one is football, soccer. Those are the two black-created business ventures that are very successful in South Africa. But we are all agreed, including with the taxi industry, that this issue of violence, we have to bring it to an end. There's another area where we are working with Minister Cele to deal with. But it's not just the police having to react. We have got to stabilize quite a lot of things. For instance, the issue of permits. It's a
route allocations?
Route allocations and so on. That is what we are engaging with the taxi sector around to say, if we can go a long way in managing that, we will actually be able to reduce violence on that score in the taxi industry.
With respect, though, Minister, there is this sense that a number of associations are allowed to let the situation disintegrate into violence when they don't get their own way. There is a perception, certainly, that the taxi industry really is a law unto itself.
Well, that's correct that there are people who do not want to see peace. But our sense is that a lot of taxi people actually would like to see peace because they earn a living out of that. They feed their families.
But have there been tough enough consequences? Have we seen operators losing licenses, for example? Have we even seen these associations being identified when they've been part of this violence? It seems to me that we wait for the next flashpoint and we're all mortified and, a lot of noise is made about it, and then it dies down until the next one.
We're tightening the laws now. For instance, we've agreed, Minister Cele has said it, and say, don't ask me to resolve this when also you are not tightening laws, where it's obvious that you have actually got to tighten laws. Take away people's licenses.
Have you?
Take away people's permits. These are the laws that now are before Parliament. The one that we are finishing now is Land Transportation Act, which, by the way, also is going to regulate better the relationship between your e-hailing services as well as your metro taxis, and so on. We also now want to lock people up and to take away licenses. Yes, definitely we are going to do that.
But again, Minister, I put it to you that these are great solutions, but they've been sitting there for some time. Why are we still here when it's obvious what needs to be done?
Well, some are new. They are not old. And I'm not saying that my predecessors, did not actually do any work. One of the things that we are also trying to align is the role of the different spheres of government, Municipalities, for instance, have got a very important role. It shouldn't be the national government that actually deals with permits and licensing. It should be municipalities. And then you have got provincial government also that plays its own role. But one of the things that the new legislation is doing is to harmonize the roles and better coordination between these different spheres, because that is where we still have a big gap.
But there are some real frustrations from the industry. I mean, you were talking about subsidies a little earlier on. There are promises that haven't been fulfilled since Nzimande was the Minister of Transport. Where are we on that?
Well, the real problems that you may be talking about, for instance, is taxi financing. I am of the view that it's too expensive, to buy a taxi and the interest that you actually pay. The issue of taxi subsidy we have to deal with. Although part of the problem of being unable to deal with the taxi subsidy is that who do you subsidize and how do we subsidize an industry that sometimes is just too informal to be able to deal with that. But we are engaging, for instance, with Santaco and other entities that have got a role to play. For instance, I'm engaging with the taxi industry itself and to say, do you know how many tires do you use in this country? How much petrol is the taxi industry that you actually use? Why aren't you forming a cooperative and have your own cooperative banks that are actually going to be able to subsidize your taxis, not at these ridiculous rates of between 25 and 30%. Those are some of the interventions, and we have said as government, we are willing to work with you and to help with you, even change legislation where necessary, so that you are actually able to take over the running of the industry in a manner that will actually going to be able to benefit yourselves rather than benefiting your established financial institutions and so on.
Let's talk about the e-hailing services versus the meter taxis. I mean, how many more, drivers must be found burned in their cars before we resolve that problem?
That is a priority for me. Right now, as I'm talking to you, I've just had a discussion with Santaco and I've had a discussion with e-hailing services, and we said we are bringing them together. I want them to have a discussion and come back to me and say, here is what we have agreed upon, because it's important that you involve them. But as government, we are going to change the laws where we actually need to change the laws. Once then they've reached this agreement, which I want done very soon, long before the end of this year, and then say, what legislation do we need to change? Because we don't want to see anybody being killed. But the positive thing, let me just say this. Santaco recognizes that we are in a new era of new apps and so on. The issue is, how then do they work together with reality?
But it's also that the leadership must be provided to make sure that, the system is able to absorb the innovations that come onto the market.
Absolutely. That is why we, as the Department of Transport nationally, we are taking a lead in bringing together all these entities between your e-hailers and you establish metro taxis, for instance, to say, how then do we work together in such a way that we do not allow violent attacks?
Minister, let's go to Sanral now. I mean, put it on the record. The e-tolls, are they staying or are they going?
The e-tolls now, we are having very extensive discussions, and I want to be honest with you. We understand the public sentiment in terms of what they are saying. But at the same time, we've got another problem that many people do not want to deal with. We owe an amount in today's term of 67 billion rands. That's the amount we owe on the building of these wonderful freeways. The issue is who is going to pay and how are we going to pay.
Well, already Sanral is reporting, 5.6 billion less because the e-tolls were not paid.
Absolutely.
So what's going to happen?
I'm very concerned about that, because Sanral is one of our wonderful initiatives, by the way. They deliver wonderful highways, but they are being dragged down by the e-tolls. The president has said to me and the others, we must solve this thing. Before the end of the year, we must know where we are going and what are we going to do.
So can you give me the answer then? Will the e-tolls stay or go? I mean, there doesn't seem to be much clarity. The ANC in Gauteng tells us they're going to go. Then the next minute, they are going to be marching to the union buildings to demand that they go. What is the position?
The issue is simply this, Bongani. How do we fund our public roads and our highways? That is the issue that we must actually get into. For example, if you take away the e-tolls now, you know, we are not saying we are not. If you take them away, how do you pay the 67 billion rands, you know? Do you increase the fuel levy? Already there are huge outcry that the fuel prices are high, legitimately so. So we can't just discuss this issue based on the sentiment that people do not want e-tolls without also looking at how are we going to be paying. By the way, it's not just a matter for now. Going forward, how are we going to be able to build good roads and who is going to fund them? If the fiscus cannot be able to fund all of that expenditure, how else then do we raise money and who is going to pay and how in order to be able to address? That's the issue we are dealing with now.
So at this stage, they are here for at least for now?
For now, there is no decision that has been taken, but there is engagement because we want to engage everybody. Those who say we need this and those who say that they don't need it. We need to engage everyone and be able to come to a common understanding based on how do we finance road infrastructure in South Africa.
All right, Minister, because you are here, I wouldn't want to waste this opportunity. I'm going to ask you to now put on your Communist Party hat. And let's talk now about the broader picture of the alliance. Looking ahead to 2019, we've got a general election around the corner. Firstly, is the SACP back from the wilderness? You've called for consultation, for example, when it comes to the appointments of people in cabinet and that sort of thing. I mean, it now emerges that recently people were being appointed from Saxonwold?
No, we were not in the wilderness, not at all. We were not in the wilderness, you know. As a matter of fact, we were amongst the first to raise issue about this perverse and rotten role of Saxonwold that it has actually been playing.
Yes, a little while ago you weren't being consulted. You were objecting because you weren't being consulted. Ministers were being appointed from elsewhere.
No, we raised this. We were the first ones to call for a judicial commission of inquiry as the South African Communist Party. We are very glad that it is actually there, taking place, and we hope that things are actually going to come out. Especially this embarrassing thing, you know, of people who sell their souls and sell their country so that they are actually able to benefit themselves and to benefit their relatives, for people who, families that we do not know where they even come from. As the SACP, we've actually been very strong on that. Of course, the issue of elections is a matter that we are engaged with the ANC at this point in time, because as the SACP, we've called for the alliance to function in a different way, you know, to say that we are in a different situation, and we've committed that by the end of October we would have had an alliance summit which will determine how do we together move forward in terms of the 2019 elections, because there are certain things that must change, that we've actually called for, that the ANC can't behave as if it has got just to do everything as if it is the only organization that's got an interest in an election and the state in the country.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there, but certainly this is going to be the first of many discussions, particularly as we look ahead to 2019. Minister, thank you very much for your time. Minister of Transport, Blade Nzimande, putting things on the record. So e-tolls, at least for now, are still on the table, and there's much discussions to be had around how to fix our transport infrastructure in this country. What are your views? What are your responses? #FullView on Twitter. As always, we thank you for watching. This is On The Record.